How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
All right, guys, we're getting into pretty dicey territory, so straighten up and don't talk about how horny you are right now.
Like right now?
Exactly right now. I've got it playing in the background.
I watched this.
I'm talking about Speed Racer, obviously.
Of course, yes.
Okay.
Animated cars really get my goat.
Not Christina Ricci.
No.
The curves on the Mach
John
5.
Goodman.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Curves of John Goodman podcast.
And people are going to think they clicked on the wrong episode and that they listened to the Speed Racer episodes. Like, did I miss like 4 episodes of this series?
Guys,
why are they talking about Speed Racer?
We'll talk about the lesbians first, and then we'll talk about John Goodman's sexiness.
Well, we got like 3 movies in between that you may have heard of.
Oh, no.
Let's start the show.
Oh, yeah, let's start the show. Well, hello. I am Gary. Wait, no. Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
And I am co-host Justin Bishop. Oh, man, Todd, you're an official co-host now. You need to introduce yourself. Let's try that again. I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm co-host Todd A. Davis.
Yeah, you've really always been an official co-host. It was just funnier to say that you were a special guest for 50 episodes in a row or whatever we're up to. I don't think we're quite that far into it since we started.
Maybe you don't introduce yourself anymore. Maybe you just say, and I'm Johnny and I have the keys. We can do it twice an episode now.
Oh, God. No.
There we
Don't
go.
encourage him, Gary.
Yes. Keeper of the keys.
So anyway, welcome to episode 1 of our series on the Wachowskis. We're going to be rolling through their filmography for basically the rest of 2021, assuming that we all make it to the end of 2021. We are going to be, actually, I think this should take us, till probably like the first week of the new year, I believe. So all the way through the holidays, so no Christmas series this year.
No horror on Halloween, no Christmas movies. What is going on?
No horror on Halloween, but we might do a little Halloween special. I got a little something in mind.
Oh,
it might involve Todd's favorite horror movies. Finally.
Oh, here we go.
So you guys have heard of these filmmakers, the Wachowskis, Lana and Lily Wachowski. They're 2 of the most influential filmmakers of all time, mostly because of one movie that came out in 1999. Their film, a little movie called The Matrix. You may be familiar with it. That movie was groundbreaking in both its effects and its storytelling, and it's influenced everything since then for the past 20 plus years, everything from action cinema to commercials and video games and comic books. Like, there is no pop culture, I don't think, in the last 20 years that has not somehow been influenced by The Matrix.
That's fair. That's fair to say. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the Wachowskis is that their filmography outside of The Matrix is kind of a different story. A lot of people even consider them one-hit wonders. Their sequels to The Matrix were met with kind of less than stellar reception. And then their post-Matrix films like Speed Racer, Cloud Atlas, Jupiter Ascending were all very ambitious, but very costly box office bombs, every one of them. So in this series, we're going to explore the careers of these filmmakers and kind of in a hope to shine some light on some of the thematic through line of their work. And I'm calling the series The Wachowskis in the Cinema of Fluidity. I was trying to come up with a name for their series, and our buddy Miles actually kind of gave me some ideas, regarding the themes of their work. And I thought this worked really well because that fluidity in that title, it kind of refers to their treatment of gender, sexuality, identity, but also genre and their visual style. Like they do not let themselves get stuck in one place.
Also, a lot of wet stuff.
There's a lot of wet stuff, even between this movie and The Matrix. A lot of fluid. But before we get to their bigger budgeted, better known films like The Matrix, we've got to go back to the beginning and discuss their debut film, the 1996 neo-noir thriller Bound.
Hi, my name's Violet. We heard you working in here, and I was just wondering if you'd like a cup of coffee.
An open invitation like Violet comes once in a lifetime.
What the fuck is... Corky, this is Caesar Corky.
I thought... fucking dark in here.
She's making an offer.
Caesar's Mafia, huh?
I need your help, Corky.
Only a fool would refuse.
It's over $2 million.
Because all money
Oh my God.
Look at his shirt. It's ruined.
is good money.
You're asking me to help you fuck over the mob.
I'm gonna ask you 10 times.
I want out.
Where's my money? If their plan succeeds, if they survive,
Sweet Jesus.
if they can trust each other.
I guess it was a job. Maybe the Carpellas. All part of the business.
They are bound
I think I'm a dead man. I'm one in the back of the head.
for the pleasure.
You were nothing before you met me. Violet! You were nothing. You had nothing.
For the money.
I want what's mine. I want half the money.
For each other.
What did she do to you?
Everything you could.
Bound.
So real quick, before we get going, I wanted to give a little disclaimer on this because there's a big elephant in the room when you're talking about the Wachowskis. I'm sure most of our listeners know that the Wachowskis are transgender women. So throughout this series, I will be referring to them by their chosen names, not by their birth names, unless it is somehow appropriate while discussing their history, regardless of what name they might have been credited under when the film that we're discussing was released. So even though in this film, for example, in 1996, they were actually credited as the Wachowski brothers, we're going to refer to them as Lana and Lily because that's who they want to be referred to as. I think to do otherwise would be disrespectful to them and would be disrespectful to others in the transgender community and the LGBT community as a whole. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before we get into this series. For the next however many weeks we're going to be working on this, that's how we're operating.
In the spirit of fairness, just to elaborate more, Todd's agreed to take the other side of this, and he's going to dead name the fuck out of everybody he can throughout the entire series.
Todd's the heel. Todd's the heel of the series.
Oh, I have to put it. It's actually. I think actually that would be more effort to do that. It's like, okay, and be an asshole. Here we go.
I mean, it's a lot of effort to look back at old interviews like from the late 90s and try to not get their names mixed up,
Right.
like their new chosen names mixed up. When I'm reading an interview that was printed in 1996, 1998 or whatever under their old names. So it got a little confusing. I had to write myself a little note as I was reading interviews, but we figured it out. We got it. We got it.
And it's so funny because I watched the movie last night with my wife, and then I was just kind of like, you know what, I'm down to just go ahead and watch the first Matrix movie.
Yeah.
And so watched the first Matrix movie, and I have the Blu-ray box set of the Matrix, and we are going to get to Bound in just a second. I promise everybody. But I started going through like the little booklet, and it says, Larry and Andy all over it. And I'm just like, oh, I thought this was newer. I thought, because I hadn't really looked at the booklet, and then started going through it. Was like, oh yeah, it's all over this. And then started listening to some of the interviews as well. And same thing. Like, oh, okay. This was older than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's the same way on the Bound Blu-ray.
Okay.
Some of the interviews you can tell were more recent, and some you can tell were older, just based on how the directors are being referred to by actors and such.
When did the Blu-ray of Bound come out?
Well, the Blu-ray that I have it's by Olive Films, and it's pretty recent.
Okay.
But
Some of
the special features were ported over from an Arrow release from the UK from a few years ago.
Yeah, the commentary track on it's definitely a older one because
Much older, yeah.
You know, they're talking about Laserdisc basically. So
Yeah,
right.
You know,
Okay.
you can tell. But what Justin's trying to say there in that disclaimer is that we understand that we are three white bearded dudes that are all three, as far as I know, hetero. We realize that can be a tricky situation when we're talking about gender fluidity and homosexuality and a lot of all those other things. So we're trying to approach it respectfully, no matter how many jokes I make. And to be fair, we're making an effort to include people from outside of our normal little bubble here in the show for this series. And we did have a woman scheduled that is a lesbian for this episode, but something came up. She wasn't unable to join us. And so in respect to that, I have removed 75 to 80% of the scissoring jokes that I had lined up for this. So
we still have like 20 to 25% left.
Yeah. So they're
Okay,
still there.
right.
I can't promise that you won't hear a scissoring joke at some point. I was going to start the episode with
Gary,
Scissor Me Timbers. This is going to be a great series. But
and see, it's jokes like that, guys. It's quality of the scissoring jokes, not necessarily quantity.
Yeah, that's true. So we're gonna
that's
have
important.
So the Wachowskis are famously private people. There aren't a ton of interviews with them. There are more early on in their career, probably around the time of Bound and The Matrix, and there are on their later films, but they've always been kind of quiet about, you know, their background and things like that. In fact, in the official production notes for The Matrix, it only said that the two, this is a quote from the production notes that was released by Warner Brothers, the two have been working together for more than 30 years. Little else is known about them. Which of course is them playing on that kind of mysterious vibe. But I did dig into it a little bit, and I was able to find a little bit about them. So before we get into the movie proper, a little bit of background on the filmmakers, as we usually like to do here. So Lana Wachowski was born in Chicago in 1965, while Lily was born about 2.5 years later. And they spent most of their pre-Hollywood life in South Chicago, where they attended a magnet school that was known for its performing arts and science curriculum. And the two were, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They were fucking nerds. They were into Dungeons and Dragons. They worked in the school's theater and AV programs, but always on the tech side of things. They weren't like actors. They were the cameramen, the lighting, things like that. And after graduating high school, Lily went to Emerson College in Boston, where she took film classes there. And Lana went to Bard in upstate New York, but both ended up dropping out after 2 years and returning to Chicago, where they earned a living by starting up their own business. It was a house painting and construction business. And while they were doing that, they were writing a little bit for on the side for a little operation called Marvel Comics.
That's news to me. I didn't know that.
yeah, they did.
Yeah.
It was a company that closed down pretty quickly and never did anything like that.
They were
would lead you to
floundering in
believe.
the 90s, and it's not a surprise that they closed their doors.
No connection to film at all.
So they started working for Marvel in 1993, writing several issues for a comic called Ecto Kid, which was part of this short-lived Marvel imprint called Razorline that was created by Clive Barker, of all people. Ecto Kid was this comic about a 14-year-old kid whose mother was immortal and whose father was a ghost dad, which gave him the ability to
his father was Bill Cosby. So this is going a lot of great places.
But being the offspring of a mortal and a ghost gave him the ability to travel within an interdimensional world called the Ectosphere. This comic lasted like 9 issues, with the Wachowskis writing the final 6 issues of the run. Although they did write the stories together, full credit was only given to Lana. So
see, if you got those superpowers, you go to New York City.
That's the best. That is the best Bill Cosby impression.
You join
I've ever
the
heard.
Avengers. You get the pudding pop.
Oh my God, that's great. Ecto Kid does sound very wet too, so that feels perfect.
Covered in plasma.
Mm-hmm.
So while the Razorline imprint only lasted about a year, but their work on Ecto Kid must have kind of impressed Clive Barker, because they followed up Ecto Kid by writing for 2 additional comics, this time for another Marvel imprint called Epic Comics. And those comics were Clive Barker's Hellraiser and Clive Barker's Nightbreed, which were sort of comics set within the world of the movies and stories by Clive Barker. Kind of cool. I'd honestly like to read the Hellraiser and Nightbreed ones. I think that.
I know it sounds fun. I mean, I swear to God, on an old episode, if we dug it up without even knowing this, or maybe I did at the time, but I remember telling someone that the Wachowskis should do Hellraiser.
Yeah, maybe it was on our Hellraiser episode.
Maybe it was on our Hellraiser episode, but it just felt like the vibe. Thinking about the Matrix and everything else, it just felt like they would totally get that like interdimensional creepy.
Yeah, it makes sense honestly when you think about it that way.
Even some of the visual aesthetic,
a lot of leather.
You could, yeah, definitely.
So the story of how these two went from being house painters and part-time comic book writers to full-on filmmakers all comes down to the influence of one man. A man whose name you will hear time and time again on this series if you listen to enough of it. It's Roger Corman. I don't think we'll ever even have to do an actual Roger Corman series. No. First of all, it would last 7 years of the podcast to cover everything that Roger Corman has produced or directed or written.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like you understand the influence of this guy just by the people he influenced or that worked for him, that he shepherded, that he mentored. But in this case, they didn't like meet Roger Corman and become proteges. They read a book. It's a book that I've got on my bookshelf in the other room right now, called How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime. It's Roger Corman's memoir. And it inspired the Wachowskis to try writing a movie script of their own. So they did, and they tried to write something that they thought would kind of be Corman-esque, I guess you would say.
Looks like they did more with that book than you did.
I have not read it.
So definitely did.
I said it's sitting on my shelf. Didn't say I've read it.
Wait a minute, you got to read the books?
Yeah.
Well,
but it does look cool on the shelf.
You just hope they like transfer information into your brain.
I'll read it one day. That's what it's there for. If I can't read every book that I own, but the script that they wrote was called Carnivore, and it was about rich people getting eaten by cannibals. Eat the rich. That was their thing. That's the joke.
But this is not, by the way, the Roger Corman produced series, the dinosaur classic Carnosaur, which for some reason is how I read that as at first. And I went through the whole week.
Wrote Carnosaur.
I went through the whole week thinking the Wachowskis wrote Carnosaur, and I was super excited about it. So I went over the notes again today.
Is that script out? Is that script out there floating around somewhere?
Carnosaur? Yeah, probably.
Carnosaur. No, not to my knowledge, Todd. I don't know. But I don't think so. It's pretty obscure.
It did make me revisit Carnosaur on IMDb, by the way, and it was Roger Ebert's worst movie of 1993. Anyway, back to the Wachowskis.
That's unsurprising. But this script never got made. Carnivore never got made. But it did get them noticed by Hollywood. It kind of got them a deal with Warner Brothers. And in 1995, Warner Brothers bought a script from them called Assassins. Dino De Laurentiis came, another name that you'll probably hear a lot on this podcast. I feel like we bring him up a lot as well. But he came on as an executive producer, and here's another familiar name. Joel Silver also came on as a producer.
I was going to mention about Corman and even Dino. Their genius is we're always like too far behind the scenes. Nobody will ever do a series on us. So their genius is every podcast is a Roger Corman podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure that was their thinking throughout their career, is hoping that we would do to discuss them on our podcast.
You laugh.
There was a marketing meeting, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure.
Roger Corman,
1965.
Roger Corman had a lot of foresight. So
this script Assassins, it was originally set to be directed by Mel Gibson, but he dropped out to direct a movie called Braveheart instead, which I think did okay, which left the project in the hands of Lethal Weapon director Richard Donner.
Which makes sense. That's Joel Silver and Richard Donner, right?
Yep, exactly. So when Richard Donner came on board, he hired a screenwriter named Brian Helgeland. I always say his name wrong. Brian Helgeland, to do some pretty extensive rewrites on the script, transforming the project into a big budget action vehicle with Sylvester Stallone in the lead. Have you guys seen Assassins?
Yes, I own Assassins.
Yeah,
nope, I have not.
I haven't seen it in years. It's Sylvester Stallone, Antonio Banderas, and Julianne Moore. Is that right?
Yes, it's Julianne Moore. Yeah.
I remember enjoying it, but this was also the mid 90s and I was young and stupid, so I don't know how it holds up. But the rewrites on it were so extensive that the Wachowskis said they were unhappy with it. They actually unsuccessfully tried to get their names taken off of the film.
Wow.
For their first movie. And Joel Silver calls them up. He's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, this is your first movie to be produced in Hollywood, and you're trying to not get credit for it, regardless of what you think. Like, this is still a feather in your cap.
Put this on the resume.
Yeah, exactly.
I was looking at the notes and just like, don't bury the lead here. Assassins exist because of the Wachowskis. I would think that movie's fun as hell. So thank you, Lily and Lana, even though you don't credit for it. I find that movie very fun.
I remember it being fun, but I always mix it up with The Specialist as well, which was another Stallone movie that came out around that time with Sharon Stone, I think.
Yeah, that feels right.
Yeah. I guess the script that the Wachowskis had written was apparently just too dark for the kind of movie that Richard Donner wanted to make, which was he just wanted to make kind of a more straightforward action movie. So according to Lana, they were, this is a quote, they were interested in the notion, they being the Wachowskis, that they were interested in the notion of pocket moral universes and the way that even people in an everyday world can have a separate morality inside of their pocket universe, which is an idea that, had it been executed, would have fit in very well with the rest of their filmography.
Meanwhile, Joel Silver and Richard Donner were like, hey, remember Lethal Weapon? Do that.
Yeah, but with Stallone.
With Stallone. Less finger banging, more funny and dying from shotgun wounds. Yeah. Yeah. Assassins is funny. It has like funny moments in it. And like Antonio Banderas is very like, he's off the wall. Like,
I thought you were saying that there was finger banging in Assassins. I was like,
no finger banging in Assassins.
That's not how you kill people. I mean, unless I'm doing it wrong.
It's one of those pressure point kind of things.
Oh, okay. All right.
You're just not doing it right. Yeah.
So while the Writers Guild would not allow them to have their names removed from the film, the experience did leave them with a new perspective. They knew that they were not going to make it as writers in Hollywood because they couldn't see their scripts being turned into something that they didn't want it to be. They didn't want other people tinkering with their ideas. So they decided, hey, if we're going to stick in Hollywood, we're just going to have to become directors ourselves. So the opportunity to do so would come along about a year later with Bound, the movie we're talking about today. So you see what happened, but despite the fact that the script had been changed drastically, Assassins ended up making a lot of money, which meant that Dino De Laurentiis was pretty fond of the Wachowskis, and he gave them a chance to direct their next script, which was a small kind of self-contained neo-noir with a small cast. Now,
if you look at that book, Making a Feature Film on a Used Car Budget, that's one of those books that's just been redone.
That one I have read.
Over. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
it's actually great for writers who kind of want to study that type of structure. But part of that structure is basically a blueprint for movies like Bound, especially Bound, because it's a tight cast, essentially in one location.
I mean, the majority of the film takes place in two adjoining apartments.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So in later interviews, Joel Silver has actually said that they allowed the Wachowskis to direct Bound as a sort of audition piece for The Matrix to see if they could run a set, because they had already written The Matrix at this point. They'd already started writing The Matrix and working on that well before they started on Bound. And now Lana later said that Joel just made that up, probably because it makes it for a good story. But you'll see that information a lot when you start reading about Bound, that this was an audition for The Matrix. But the Wachowskis kind of refute that, saying that's not really true.
Maybe they don't know everything. Maybe that's what Joel Silver was thinking.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. That's true. I mean, that could have been in the back of his mind, but
I mean, the information kind of does support it, of like, hey, let's see what you can do kind of on the indie side of
right. Yeah, I mean,
before we dump all this money.
Yeah, I was joking, but yeah, now that you say that, yeah, I mean, how do you get a job directing The Matrix
when you've never done anything before? Yeah.
No, especially as your first directing to
exactly. Well, you've never been on a film set before. Like they weren't film students. They weren't working on student films in film school and things like that. They were comic book writers. Yeah. There's nothing about that proves that they can run a set. Although I'm going to say it's pretty obvious that they did know that what they were doing when they finally got on set.
Oh yeah, that's going to be a big part of every story you hear about. Anybody in this movie will tell you that.
Yeah. So they had the idea when they were writing Bound, they had the idea to write a story about how one might see a woman. This is kind of almost a exact quote from them in interviews, but pretty close. So what they say when they were writing this. They're like, this is a story about how you might see a woman on the street and kind of make assumptions about her sexuality, but how those assumptions might be wrong. They wanted to kind of play with stereotypes, and they wanted a story that was filled with twists and turns. You'll see Billy Wilder's name and that kind of his brand of film noir thrown around a lot when the influence behind Bound is being discussed. So they write this script, it gets passed around to multiple studios, and a lot of them showed interest, but only if the Wachowskis changed the character of Corky to a man, which they refused to do. Saying that they said, quote, this movie's been made, or that movie's been made 1 million times, so we're really not interested in it. And they stood their ground. They could have easily gotten this movie made because it's a very good script if they had changed Corky to a man and made it a more traditional love story, but that's not the movie they wanted to make.
Even this early, so you can already see them like bucking conventions of what people expect. And I mean, this is a good enough point as any to mention too. You know, the music in this, which is really great. There's some good points in it, but it's by a guy named Don Davis, and
who would end up doing the Matrix and stuff with them as well.
Oh yeah.
You know, he worked for cheap. This is the story of everything on this movie, or a lot of things on this movie. Cheap. You know, the song that they wanted to use was Girl from Ipanema, and they couldn't afford it. They wanted like Frank Sinatra's version of it. And it just goes into play for what you were just saying, just because, you know, I wasn't super familiar with that, although I listened to Frank Sinatra more than you'd think. But essentially that song is about a guy wishing he could tell a girl he loves her because he sees her walking down the street every day. And like, he's attracted to her. She's always walking along basically. And it's
the song you hear in every Italian restaurant in America.
Right. So, you know, so he's like, you know, it talks about him like casting a glance or something, but she never sees him or something. But I can totally see how that song matches up because, like you said, he's making assumptions that she'd even be interested if she could see him. But maybe
exactly.
Maybe she's a lesbian.
Yeah. And eventually, Dino De Laurentiis agreed to finance the film with a budget of $6 million. The way that they tell the story about the meeting with Dino is like he's reading the script. Violet, she is a woman? Yes. Corky, she is a woman? Yes. I love it. Let's do it.
Dino's in.
Dino's in. He apparently had, later on in the process, he kind of tried to get them to change one of the characters to a man. But at first, like the fact that it was two lesbians was like, Dino was like, yes, let's do this. Let's make a lesbian movie. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, Hollywood is known for, you know, seeing that something is successful and then doing 30 knockoffs of it. But, you know, for a story that's, it's a fairly standard kind of heist / romantic movie here. I would think anybody would want to jump on, well, okay, bad turn of phrase, jump on this, but I would think a studio would jump at the chance to make something like this because those characters are just more interesting, more complicated. There's more
it's a unique way of telling a familiar story.
Right. And I think
you're dismissing though the idea that there's two lesbians here. And at the time, I mean, I'm just saying, I mean, it's
no, you're right. This is the mid
taboo. This is not
this is the mid 90s.
Well, I was just about to say back, you know, not long around the same time, the makers of Spawn, you know, they changed one of the characters to, you know, they changed the race of one of the characters because it made the relationship more interesting, deeper, and more complicated. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great thing. I think that's a great thing to do. You know,
but Hollywood's always a little bit scared about anything that's not what what's been making money already. And this is before something like Boys Don't Cry, which came out 2 or 3 years after this, and was a major awards contender. This is kind of not that obviously there have been gay and lesbian films essentially since the beginning of the medium.
Right.
But which I think I mentioned on a few episodes ago, the Celluloid Closet, incredible documentary if you want to learn more about the history of LGBT representation in films. But they weren't in the mainstream, not that this movie is, but not like they would later become.
Right around this time was the time when there had literally been a scenario on Melrose Place where there was the character named Matt who had like kissed his boyfriend in a scene, and like advertisers were pulling out
Yeah,
like,
I think they had to take the scene out.
They
Or
had to rip the
shot
scene
of them
out.
kissing.
Like they could not air the scene.
And this is like right around the time, like mid 95, 96.
Yeah. And so I mean, you'll see there's a huge double standard at this time for this kind of thing. I mean, now luckily we're moving past that, it feels like, but it's not as easy as you'd think at this point to have two gay people expressing sexual relationship.
Yeah, and the trouble with that didn't stop just in getting the movie financed. They had the green light, they had the money, but they had a lot of difficulty when it came to casting the film because very few actresses were really interested because they didn't want to play lesbians. So they had a hard time casting it for the very same reason. So the part of Violet was originally expected to go to Linda Hamilton, of all people, which you would think that the role of Corky would go to Linda Hamilton. It just seems to fit her persona that had been established prior to this. Especially in Terminator 2.
Yeah, I was about to say, wait a minute, what?
But but Linda Hamilton wanted to play against type about the type of roles that she had been cast in recently. So that's why she wanted to play Violet at first, is because she wanted to play something different than what was expected of her. And so she was cast as Violet or very close to being on board. And Jennifer Tilly read for the role of Corky because Jennifer Tilly was known. I mean, she was still fairly early in her career, but she had already won an Oscar at this point for her role in Bullets Over Broadway, a Woody Allen movie. But she had always kind of played the sex pot kind of character, the girly girl.
Yeah.
So she wanted to play Corky. So because that was going against type. So she read for that, and they were kind of on board with her playing Corky. And she was really excited for the role because it was such a departure from anything she'd done before. Well, fast forward a little bit, and Linda Hamilton drops out for whatever reason, creative differences, whatever. I'm not sure why she dropped out, but it's one of the millions of things that causes an actor to not be able to be in a role. And they auditioned Gina Gershon, who was unknown at the time. I think at the time they were auditioning for this, like Showgirls wasn't out yet. Not that Showgirls would have helped her, but still, even though she is, as we've discussed, outstanding in that movie. But she was an unknown actress at the time. So she auditions for the role of Corky, and the filmmakers then kind of went to Jennifer Tilly and asked her if she'd be interested in playing Violet instead. And Tilly was kind of disappointed because she didn't want to play Violet. She's like, I've played that role 100 times. I don't want to play that. She was looking forward to playing the less feminine role of Corky. She wanted to work out and get muscles and kind of be able to act kind of butch and not wear makeup and have short hair and, all this stuff that she had not ever been allowed to do in other roles. But then Jennifer Tilly, they brought them in to read together, and they're like, listen, we're going to read both of you. We're going to, and it could go either way. You could play Corky. She could play Corky. You could play Violet. She could play Violet. We're going to see how this works. So Jennifer Tilly meets with Gina Gershon to do a little kind of a screen test. And as soon as they worked, she immediately knew that Gershon would make a better Corky. Like, she's like, this is her role. Like, she is meant for this role. So Jennifer Tilly ends up accepting the role of Violet instead.
She also realized that she could identify with Violet a little bit better once she's able to see how the Wachowskis have written this thing. Violet is not weak. Violet is also a strong character. She's underestimated by all the men around her. She's just playing the game because that's how she survives.
Exactly.
But she can do her own thing. So there's more depth to Violet than there is a normal, babe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Gershon, sorry, they mentioned too, Susan Bright talked about that with Gershon when, we'll talk about Susan, I'm sure, but when she comes on, she was worried that Gershon had this idea of coming in and being this normal butch lesbian and like the stereotypical butch lesbian of like, what are you going to, how are you going to portray this? That she had a conversation with her. And she's like, I don't want you to think that like everything you see that you've seen of butch women is the same, don't play it that way. And she's like, I wasn't even thinking of that. I'm doing James Dean.
Yeah.
Or
she's doing Marlon Brando
or young Clint Eastwood. She was like, those are my inspirations for this role. And she was like, oh,
which you can totally see. Like,
she's like, that's perfect.
Yeah. Her swagger in this, like, it's very like James Dean, Marlon Brando, like all over the place.
Yeah. There's the stare in the when the mobsters get out and she's in the back of the truck, and she calls that very much like Clint Eastwood. Like there's the stare that she gives them and stuff. And yeah, it's very cool that this is where her headspace is at on this.
Yeah.
Nice. Kudos to Jennifer Tilly, because I mean, it's one thing to be super passionate about a role and and really push for it and really get it, understand the character and really push to for them to book you, but to see that someone else has a better handle on it and say, you know what, the project is more important.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of humility and
exactly, and
then let her pride get in the way.
Big kudos there, because I mean their chemistry.
Oh, dude, it's
palpable.
Some of the best screen chemistry I've ever seen in a movie, honestly. So, rounding out the cast, at least the main cast, Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants. It was actually Gina Gershon who suggested him. They were friends. They were acquaintances. They maybe worked together once in the past. I'm not sure, but they were acquaintances, and he really wanted the role, and she actually suggested him for it, and he got it. And this was actually his first lead role in a film, and he chews it up. Man.
Oh yeah,
like, he really does.
He's so great, but it's everything you come to love about him. To think this is the birth of Joey Pants.
He was birthed fully formed.
But part of the reason too is like he apparently agreed to work super cheap since they didn't have a lot of money, and he even like that suit's like apparently his real life suit. Like that was just a suit he owned.
Doesn't fit him very well.
It's a little baggy. I thought that too, and I was like, maybe that's a character choice, but no, that's Joey Pants's choice.
Apparently. He just doesn't know how to go to a tailor. Right?
He's just like, whatever, the suit I got. Wachowskis apparently asked him to watch The Treasure of the Sierra Madre from 1948, based Caesar on Humphrey Bogart in that movie.
That makes sense.
Interesting.
That does make sense.
And he was also who brought on Maloney, Christopher Maloney, and
who was also very unknown at the time.
Yeah, they had worked together. They had been.
He's a fucking
together.
Meme now, but
right? No, but both of these guys are like. All of these people are like well-known names now, but Maloney and Joey Pants had worked together on. They were working on a show on NBC called The Finelli Boys. Apparently, Joey Pants offered him, and man, I tell you what, Maloney, even in the interviews you'll see for this movie, is just the coolest fucking guy.
He really is. Yeah, he's so charming.
He's so charming, and he had this idea to make it like funny and dark. I think the Wachowskis said like one other person had read Johnny as a funny character. Everybody else tried to play it straight. It was like Nick Cassavetes, I think they said, read for Johnny, and
Nick Cassavetes.
Yeah, and they said they laughed at him, and then he was like, "What the fuck? What?" He was like, "Are you trying to be funny? Like, what's happening? Is there something about this is funny?" And that triggered it though that Johnny's funny. Like there's a part of him that's kind of hilarious. And Maloney came in and also immediately was just like read it as a funny role. I thought he'd be like just try to make stupid lines and thinks he's a tough guy and a ladies' man and is really kind of pathetic and that sort of thing. So I mean, just seeing the interview with him, they said he came in and they didn't even have anybody to read against him that day or whatever. And so his interview his audition was like kind of a disaster, but like something about him just charmed them that they were like, okay, this is the guy, and he gets who this character should be. Like, good, this works. And but he got to do some of the only like improvisation on the thing, because one thing you'll hear about the Wachowskis is like they're so nailed down on how this thing looks. They know everything. But Maloney would have like little moments. Jennifer Tilly says the only line she got to do herself was like when she let the cops in, she said, "Come on in," and that was not in the script, and they left that in, and she felt very good about that. But Joey Pants,
it's a bold choice. It's a bold choice.
He did the handshake. Joey Pants did the handshake after they've been doing their thing on the couch,
which is hilarious.
Yeah, and
no, because you know where that hand's been.
Do the commentary track. He's like super proud of that. He's like, "I thought of that one. I thought of that." And he gets a shoot laugh every single time.
It's funny.
But they say, all of them say like Maloney was the one, like when Joey Pants hands him the towel and stuff, Maloney like wipes his face first. That was all him. Like that was, and he says,
I was disappointed when he got killed.
I know, he's great.
On.
He says in the interview that's on the DVD, the Olive DVD, he says the one thing I thought of that I didn't get in is like I still remember standing in that scene. They take the clippers and they have the guy's hands tied behind his back, and they're like, "I'm going to ask you 10 times." he's like, and I thought in my head, take off his shoes and let's play 20 questions. And I didn't say that. And he's like, I didn't say that, and I still regret it to this day. It's like, that's the thing he thinks about with this movie, apparently.
So another guy that's in the cast, he's only in the movie briefly, but there's a guy who plays the mob boss. The mob boss. The actor's name is Richard Serafian. I think is how you say his name, but he's not really an actor. He does do some acting. He's actually primarily known as a director. It was kind of a thrill for the Wachowskis to get him on the movie. See, this guy, he started directing back in probably the early 60s. He did a lot of TV shows like Lawman and I Spy and Wild Wild West, nice. The Gunsmoke, stuff like that. But
this is Gino, right?
Yeah, the big guy. The movie that he is probably, I'd say most, he did do a lot of movie directing as well, but the one he's probably most known for is Vanishing Point. Vanishing Point came out in 1971. It's this badass car chase movie. Nice. Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof is highly, highly influenced by that, to the point where the car that they go out to test drive is the car from Vanishing Point. And in the movie Death Proof, when the car is being described, Zoe Bell goes, "That's the fucking Vanishing Point car," it's a very clear reference. I'm only mentioning that to say that if you haven't seen Vanishing Point, you should watch it because it's awesome.
Well, and also he's fantastic in the brief moment he's in there. He's like an unstoppable force in the music. Yeah. And this is one of the things I thought of earlier when I was talking about Don Davis doing the music, because the cue when Gino starts walking towards Caesar, like that whole scene where Caesar pulls the gun on him basically, and he's like, "Do you know who I am?" Yeah. It's like walking. It's fucking crazy. Like it's super intense. It works really, really well. And so the music and his acting and everything is fucking phenomenal. When he gets shot and he falls straight back.
Oh, it's such a great shot.
Like that scene is so.
I don't know how they
about
did
that scene is like my favorite part of this movie. It's just fantastic, and it's totally like you watch that, and it's like immediately when that happens, you're like, "Oh, these guys do the Matrix."
Oh fuck. Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh fuck, you fucked up." But also, it was just like technically looking at it, being like,
"Oh yeah,
oh these guys, okay, yeah, this is making sense." and apparently, he really wanted to do that, and they were like not wanting him to fall back because
he's a 65-year-old man.
Yeah. And he's stiff as a board. Just
yeah.
But they had like their production designer and stuff like go off and come back from like lunch and saying like, "I thought about it. We could build a rig for this guy. Like, I know how to do this." So they had like a whole thing that like lowered him just right for the fall. But it was dead set that was how the fall would look, because I even looked this up. They had been watching apparently the Wachowskis watch boxing. And so they had seen a fight between Vincent Petway and Simon Brown. So you just YouTube Vincent Petway KOs Simon Brown. And in that match, Vincent Petway punches Simon Brown and he falls literally just like that, straight back onto his back. Only his fists are still up in the air, and he's still kind of moving his fists while he's laying on his back. Fight. It's fucking phenomenal. But they said that they had seen that fight, and they were like, "Oh, that's what we're gonna do for this."
That's awesome. So while we're on the subject of the cast, a little segment that I completely forgot about last week. So I apologize if you worked on that, Todd. But let us know, Todd.
Yes.
About was anybody in this in a little show called Star Trek?
As a matter of fact, there were some folks in
Star
Trek.
What if I built all that up and he's like, "No, nobody in this one."
Nope. And moving right along. Okay, real quick. Mary Mara, who is Sue, the bartender, was in the last 3 episodes of season 3 of Enterprise in 2004, which we have not yet gotten to on Computer Resume podcast, but we'll talk about that later. Mr.
Years from now.
Yeah, a long time. Barry Kivel, who plays Shelley, was in season 5, episode 26 of Star Trek Next Generation. That's the season 5 finale. It's Time's Arrow Part 1. It's the one where they find Data's head in a cave, and it's apparently dated back to like the 1800s.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Oh, yeah. It's a fun one. And then Mr. Kevin Michael Richardson, who is cop number 2, who we see taking a number 1. He was in 1 episode, 1 movie, and 5 Star Trek video games. He was in an episode of Lower Decks. That's season 1, episode 3. He was in, he's credited with additional voices in Star Trek Into Darkness. And then he was in Klingon Academy, Starfleet Command, Starfleet Command, New Worlds, DS9 The Fallen, and Starfleet Command Volume 2, Empires at War. But the one of note is the DS9 The Fallen, where he actually voices the character of Benjamin Sisko. So there you go.
Yeah, Kevin Michael Richardson is a huge like voiceover guy.
Oh yeah, tons of voice.
I was gonna say
he also played fucking Goro in Mortal Kombat, I believe.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I didn't know that.
He's definitely Goro. He's in everything. He's in Invincible, if you've seen it now. He's got like a real, just a deep, I don't know. He can do like a real monster voice, basically.
Yeah. His voice is very, very distinct. And also Don Davis, the composer. I know we haven't talked much about the music yet, but he actually provided some music for the Next Generation season 6, episode 14, Face of the Enemy. And that's the one where Deanna Troi goes undercover with the Romulans.
Fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's everybody on Star Trek.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd.
But Gina Gershon could have been a Vulcan, it feels like.
She definitely could have been a Vulcan. Yeah, she's got that look.
Vulcan.
Yeah, she's got the look. So Bound was filmed in Santa Monica, California, filmed over about a 38-day period. They filmed it some on location, some on sets. It was a fairly small production. One of the Wachowskis, what I consider one of their most important collaborators on the film, was cinematographer Bill Pope.
Oh, yeah.
So originally another director of photography, and nobody ever names him in interviews, whoever this other director of photography was, apparently a big name DP was attached to this originally. And he'd been hired and he ended up actually leaving the film saying that he couldn't find a crew. He couldn't hire enough guys who could work cheap enough to fit within the film's budget. Like he gets there one day, he's like, I can't do this for this kind of money. I can't. The guys that I use are too expensive. So I guess his agent was the same agent as like Bill Pope. So he ends up quitting, and Dino De Laurentiis calls up this guy's agent. He's like, oh, do you have anybody else who could work for cheap? He's like, I got a guy who can work for cheap. And that guy was Bill Pope. And Bill Pope knew a lot of other guys who could work for cheap. So Bill Pope, he had actually gotten his start. And the reason he knew all these guys who could work for cheap is because he had gotten his start working on kind of lower budgeted genre movies.
Gorman stuff?
No, I don't think he did any Corman stuff that I can recall. He had worked on a lot of music videos before.
I was going to say he did a lot of music videos.
Did a lot of music videos to start, but then he got his first official director of photography credit on a like Z-grade horror movie from 1989 called Death Doll. However, the following year, he kind of made his big splash as a cinematographer on Darkman, Sam Raimi, and who he would work with a couple of years later on Army of Darkness. And that's actually what made the Wachowskis want to hire him. Because Dino De Laurentiis was like, this guy, he just shoots skeletons. And they're like, nah, he can do more than that. And the Wachowskis were like, that's the fucking Army of Darkness guy. Yes, hire him.
Nice.
That's cool. The thing, man. Hey, here's a lesson for everybody. It feels like is like do stuff because you love it. Don't try to nickel and dime anybody at first, and maybe eventually it pays off. Because he had done Clueless, I think, right before this.
Yeah, Clueless was 95.
Yeah, and Fire in the Sky, Disney's Blank Check. I just saw.
Yeah, Disney's Blank Check. I mean, he in the years since this, he has become one of the most sought after directors of photography in Hollywood. He'll continue to work with the Wachowskis throughout the Matrix trilogy. He does all 3 of them. He worked on Spider-Man 2 and 3 with Sam Raimi again. Nice. He's worked with Edgar Wright, Jon Favreau, Robert Rodriguez, and most recently, movie that's out in theaters right now, he's the director of photography on Marvel's Shang-Chi.
Cool.
Although, oddly enough, credited as William Pope.
Oh, weird.
I went to see the movie and I saw...
he's all grown up now, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. So I was watching it. I was like, William Pope, is that the same guy? And I looked it up, and it is indeed the same guy who for some reason is going by William now. But
all right.
So Edgar Wright, the Wachowskis, Robert Rodriguez, like you're doing okay. Sam Raimi,
and these are all very visual directors,
right?
Too.
So they're counting on you now. Like he got his bag.
Yeah,
he worked cheap, but then he got his bag. And Oh, he also did Team America, apparently. So that's fun.
That's right. Yeah.
He's great. I think he's a great director of photography. I've always thought his work was great.
He's not going to steal from that son of a bitch, Dean Cundy, though. So don't you try it.
He's not the GOAT, but he's up there.
Right.
He's up there. But he was heavily involved in the crafting of the film's visual style. So he basically, like, you know, he went to meet the Wachowskis, and he walks into their office and they've got a copy of Frank Miller's Sin City sitting out on their desk.
Nice.
And he looks at that. This is like his meeting to see if he can get the job. He looks at that and he's like, "Are you guys like using that as inspiration?" And they're like, they look at him. They're like, maybe. And he's like, that would totally make sense. You should totally use Sin City as inspiration on this. And I think that's when they like just knew that they had the right guy. Yeah. And he was also looking forward to it because he not as seasoned as he is now, but he still had been working for years as a director of photography. And he kind of liked the idea of going on a set where he kind of had to teach the directors what to do sometimes. And he could like mentor them a little bit.
Has Bill Pope actually directed anything?
I don't know. Not to my knowledge.
Huh. It just seems like his skill set's kind of leaning that way.
Yeah, but you know, not all
TV and like music videos.
Yeah, so no movies.
Yeah, he did Cosmos, the most recent Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh yeah, he directed some episodes.
Okay.
A lot of the episodes, yeah, 8 of them. So
that's a very visually pretty cool series too.
Nice.
He directed Metallica's One.
Damn.
Yeah, how about that?
That's a good one.
Yeah. Anyway,
so as Gary mentioned earlier, very, very little improvisation was allowed during filming because the Wachowskis had a very clear vision for what they wanted, and they had carefully planned out every single moment in the film. It didn't leave a lot of room for going off script. And of course, this methodical planning also extended to the film's sex scenes as well. So the sex scenes were choreographed by Susie Bright. Gary brought Susie Bright up earlier. Susie Bright's a feminist writer and sex educator, and the Wachowskis were actually big fans of Bright and asked her to have a small cameo in the film. She plays the woman in the bar that Corky tries to talk to, and then the cop, her girlfriend, comes up who's a cop. You know, that's her. That's Susie Bright.
Okay.
And so they send her the script, and she loves the script. She reads it and loves it. She loved that it portrayed women that are unapologetically enjoying sex and having sex, and they're not just sexual like pieces in a puzzle. You know what I mean? Like this is about their lives.
Well, because a lot of times, like women, they're in film and they take pleasure in sex, but it's like the man's just like ravishing them or giving them pleasure and that sort of thing. But you never get to see essentially women enjoying it too. Like they're their own beings. Like they're the ones calling the shots. Like they're the ones that are, you know, the scene, for instance, like with Gina Gershon, like looking at herself in the mirror, like looking at her hand and stuff, like they're like relishing in the, I just got laid. Yeah. Like I did that, you know, like there's a, I don't know, like an ownership of it that they take in, and it's different than how women are generally portrayed in a film.
Yeah. And that really appealed to her. But she was a little disappointed that when she got to the sex scenes in the script, there's not really anything there. There's no description or direction as to how the scenes would be shot. So she actually offered to come on as a sex consultant on the film.
Which I'm throwing out there for anybody listening. I will also be your sex consultant on the film. Not in a movie like Bound. I always think
you wouldn't know anything about it.
Yeah, I was going to say the wife and I watched this, and she's just like, "Oh, don't get all hot over there." And it reminded me of it was either Mitch Hedberg or Mitch Fattel. I can't remember which comedian had like a little bit about watching porn, and they were like, "I only watch porn with dudes though, because you like to imagine you're in the porno and you're like really just giving it to somebody." And he's like, "So you want to." Part of filmmaking is about like putting yourself in that person's situation. And he's like, at any time I watch lesbian porno and I put myself in that situation, I feel like I would be asked to leave immediately.
There's Mitch Fattel, by the way.
So in the main sex scene in the film, set in Corky's apartment, that was filmed in one long continuous shot because the Wachowskis felt like this one take would be more realistic than if they'd shot it from a bunch of different angles and edited them together, like every other sex scene you see in movies, basically. They're like, this is going to seem much more natural if we shoot it to where there are no cuts. And most of the time, it's an incredible shot. And most of the time, a scene like this is on a closed set with as few people as possible on set, usually the director and a camera operator and very little else, maybe a grip or two, if needed. But in this case, the Wachowskis on the commentary said there's probably like 25 people on set because the way that they filmed the set, the shot required a lot of moving parts. And I mean that literally, they were not able to move the camera around the bed and they weren't able to fit it around the bed. So they actually had to have grips moving the walls as the camera panned around. Grips would move the walls out of the way, move them back. And so they actually had to have a bunch of people on set during the scene. And Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly were kind of nervous about it at first. They reportedly took a lot of tequila shots before. But Bill Pope in his interviews say that they got pretty comfortable after a few takes because they had to do several takes and they started joking around during it. And eventually by the end of it, they're like walking over to craft services butt ass naked, and they just like it's no big deal at all.
Well, how else do you walk over to craft services
in this COVID era? I mean,
wear a mask.
Wear a mask at least.
Listen, I was on a film set not long ago, and for craft services there, I wasn't required to be naked in the film. I still stripped down and walked over to craft services.
Is that the one where you got asked to leave for sticking your dick?
I was about to say, is that why you
in the
so tell me about? So
job
let's
on a
talk
film
about the
set?
release and reception of this movie, Justin. Let's go ahead and move on with that.
Zach Steinberg, who's the editor on the film, he's one of the guys, by the way, that talks about the Wachowskis. Like he talks about every film he's ever like messed with. He has to watch everything like twice before anything because he's watching it with like producers and then the director and then like going through to see what they're going to do. Just that side note, he talks about like he was super impressed the first time working with the Wachowskis because everything was so meticulously planned and the shots were just so incredible. He was just like, I've never seen anybody make a movie like this before. Like they're just, everything seems really dead on. Like there's nothing to really fuck with here. He did mention too in the commentary track that there's a great alternate recording somewhere because they had to do a second recording for the sound during that scene. So, because he's like, the original is fantastic. It's just them in the bed. And then you just hear things like people yelling, walls, hands, toes,
finger her.
Exactly.
That's what he says. I mean, I watched the same interview that Gary's talking about. He literally says you can hear one of the Wachowskis yelling, "Finger her! Put your hand in her mouth."
it's just
kiss her.
Yeah, there's
my wife's not home to hear this
Tilly
recording right
Vulture.
now because she would be wondering what's going on in here.
It's like, who are you Zoom chatting with? I pay monthly for this. You let me have my time. You're supposed to be at work.
This is my me time.
It's for the show, I promise.
This is extra content that's going on the Patreon. You have no idea. This is how I pay our bills, buddy.
I like the fantasy world Gary lives in where this podcast pays bills.
Yeah. There was an interview with Jennifer Tilly. I don't know if you saw it in the Vulture magazine. And she talks a lot about
the most recent one where they had her and Gina Gershon's reunion. Was that it?
It was 2014.
Or that might have been Vanity Fair.
Yeah, I think this was Vulture. It was like 2014. But, she talked a lot about this thing. So I had some quotes. I was going to try to do her voice like, actors are always saying sex scenes are so technical.
I don't like that at all.
So like that. Anyway, she says actors are always saying sex scenes are so technical. Everyone's standing around watching. It is technical, but there's something about being naked with a member of the opposite sex that you still want them to think that you're hot. There's a reason why people are always having affairs with their leading men. with Gina, it was really relaxing because you could say things to her that you wouldn't say to other people. Like, can you put your hand on my thigh so my butt doesn't look so big? Can you hold my breast up so it looks plump and juicy? You would never
They're
ever
making
say
each other
those things
look
to a
good.
man. Yeah. So between takes, I would say, Gina, there's a shoe sale at Barney's. If we finish early, we should go over to Barney's and shop for shoes. She's like, so it was actually surprisingly unsexy. But then when you saw it on screen, I was blown away. We actually have chemistry in buckets. So one of the things I wanted to get to is that she does say in this too, that, you know, there was a worry they had that they talked to the Wachowskis about, like what Dino De Laurentiis was a producer. And they said they were worried that when they finished the scene, that he would send it off to Italy and insert like random breasts and buttocks and just like make it more explicit. And so the Wachowskis talked to them about this. And that was part of the decision that they're like, all right, well, what we're going to do is that we're going to nail this down and we're going to shoot this whole thing in one long continuous shot.
So they can't cut it up.
He can't cut it. And without it looking really, really obvious.
Yeah.
So she said, so the day we were supposed to shoot the love scene, it was a closed set, but there were monitors in the hallway and everybody was clustered around the monitors watching. But she said what they're yelling out is like they had the cameras going around. And so like they would yell those things like hand or toes or whatever. It was to tell them like what's being focused in on in the scene so that they could go ahead and like really emphasize that in their acting. And that they had done like 8 takes of this thing. But it was basically just so they could nail this down in one shot so he couldn't cut in with it basically.
Yeah. And it makes for a pretty incredible looking shot. Yeah, it really is. Visually, this film, like I had not seen this movie in years before watching it this time. And I was shocked by how visually stunning the film is overall and how knowing that they would go on to do something as visually incredible and groundbreaking as The Matrix, like seeing some of their shots, like that opening shot in the closet, like looking down at Gina Gershon, like what an incredible shot, zooming out from the gun, the you know, where it zooms out of the gun, like what an incredible shot for a first-time filmmaker to do that. You could tell they're very like influenced by graphic novels and things like that, because that's a very comic booky kind of shot.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, it just even
comic booky, but it looks great.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Patty Podesta was an artist that worked on, she's now like a pretty popular artist, but she worked in museums and in books and stuff like that.
Who did the opening credits.
But she did the opening credits on this. And she talks about like a lot of her, you know, when they asked her to do the opening title sequence. I think she had done some other stuff, but they brought her in and thought that she would be really good for this. So she worked really hard on it. I did not realize this. This just impressed me so much that she did. I mean, those are actual like literal foam letters that she created for like Bound, you know,
if they did this now, it would be CGI, but that's all practical.
It's all practical. It's foam letters she created. And she knew that they were really interested in graphic novels. So she knew like, all right, how can I set this up that it goes like really high contrast into like a more fleshy look? And she said she wasn't really sure, but they weren't sure. So they left it up to her. So she created these letters and like set up the lighting and the cameras. And she said they came in one day when they were trying to get like the angles they wanted to shoot. And she said they're so technically savvy, like immediately, like right when they walked in, she said they saw the letter sitting there in the light set up and they were like, oh, fuck yeah, I know what to do with this. And then they just immediately both started working and like started moving the lights around and like the cameras and like just doing the whole scene. But they had to use like her base for like she had created there, but they knew exactly like immediately what they wanted to do with it. But she went off that fact too, that she was like, I knew from talking to them and looking up who they were, like they're into graphic novels and that sort of thing. And but if you go back and watch those credits now, it takes a different effect, like knowing like, no, that's practical. That's physically there. That's not just some CGI thing moving around.
It's pretty cool. It's a pretty audacious way to start the movie too. It sets you up for what is going to be a very visual journey.
One of the other things I was going to bring up about the sex scene too, that drove me crazy, like hearing about, is just that, you know, we mentioned it up top, just the there's a double standard in Hollywood at the time with what was going on. They struggled with an NC-17 rating on this movie just because of the sex scene. And in that same Vulture interview with Jennifer Tilly, she talks about that. I'll just read the quote. She says, the Wachowskis sent the film to the ratings board and they instantly got an NC-17. It was unbelievable. The Wachowskis said it's homophobia, clear and simple, because all you saw was one of my breasts. You saw two of Gina's breasts. You didn't see any genitalia. You saw my hand. The MPAA said, because Jennifer and Gina are such good actors, it looks like she's really giving her a hand job. And the Wachowskis said, let me get this straight. If they weren't such good actors, you would let it go, though? And the MPAA sort of said, well, yeah, it was really sad. We ended up having to sub in a different take. I think it was take 7 where the camera accidentally dipped and missed my hand. The take that we ended up using, it was before we got all the kinks out. They had the door to the bathroom open wider, so it was brighter in the room. Where the take we wanted to use had a lot of shadows. The makeup person had sprayed us with sweat, so it looked like we were really going at it. It was sort of more graphic. And Gina didn't like this other take. She said, I was overacting with my feet. Then at the end, all of a sudden, my breast wanted to get on frame and it fell into camera like boom. My breasts are really big, so it was a little more pornographic than Gina's fashion plate breasts. In the perfect take, I was raised up on one hand, kind of watching her, and I'm not sure you could see either of my bosoms, maybe a little side boob. And in this take, I was down on her, so my breasts were touching her breasts. I felt like it was 10 times more graphic than the take we wanted to use, but apparently, because you missed the hand, it was like, you missed the hand, but you gained the breast, but the hand's not there. It's all right.
It's so weird. It is such a double standard.
God, that's weird.
No. Well, in order to receive the R rating, they did make a lot. They made a handful of changes, but the majority of them were from that sex scene, where they had to take the images of what Lana Wachowski calls hand sex to be edited out. I like that. That's a fun term.
Yeah.
Those cuts have been restored, though, in pretty much every version of the film that's available on home video. So if you watch this along with us, you have most likely seen or had access to the unrated cut.
Hand sex is all I know anymore. So got him.
There it is.
Now, I will say this. I wanted to bring this up, too, because I did not know this, but Susan Bright talks a lot about this in the commentary track for this film, that one thing the Wachowskis are very familiar with is the reason she was so interested in is they understood stuff that most people wouldn't. So for anybody who's thinking about the Wachowskis, like as they transition over time, that this wasn't always on their mind. I mean, there's evidence they clearly understood this thing in a different at a different level than like a traditionally like just a male director would understand something. The Wachowskis, one of the things Susan Bright points out is like the initial meeting between Violet and Corky, like Violet staring down at her hand, and she's got like the goddess tattoo on her thumb, but she's like, there's a close-up of Corky's hand and it like moves along her hand, and Susan Bright says that that's like legitimately in the lesbian community, the hand is the sex organ. Right. So that's a part of it. There's even the discussion of daddy's hands or something, and that's a whole other reference that I haven't even dived into yet. But anyway, she mentions all this in the commentary track. It's just like when they saw that, and the Wachowskis were like, it's funny, in San Francisco, that was the first time that got like a huge pop, that like people, it was like it got the reaction we were hoping for. And she was like, that's the point where people realize this is not Hollywood lesbians. This is something else. This is like, you actually understand who we are. And,
right.
And so there's those scenes. There's even the scene with like, Gina Gershon fixing the pipe or whatever, or getting the earring out and stuff like that, which is very like her hands all wet. And,
very wet. It's a very, Susie Bright talks about how much liquid and wetness there is in this. So she calls it a very wet film in that commentary.
but she talks about that they're like that they got it. Like there was on a deeper level for for the lesbian community, that it wasn't just these two women, even the interactions between Violet and Corky, where it's almost as though Violet has to prove to Corky that she's not just some straight girl trying to lead her on. And there's like a testing, like to like see her, like, you serious? Are you really a lesbian? Like, are you?
Well,
and
you mentioned that screening in San Francisco. Is that it was like an LGBT, or I think it was called the Gay and Lesbian Film Festival or something like that.
The commentary track, sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, yes, it is that. And the commentary track is when you listen to that, it's the first time they've seen the film since then.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because,
wow.
And the reason is because they got such a great reaction at that screening that they didn't want to revisit the movie and ruin that moment for themselves. Because they're like, nothing's going to top this. No other premiere, no other festival, no other reaction is going to top how well it was received at that festival.
So Susan Bride was just there because she was like, she wanted to be there because she was like, they've got everything else. So when she wanted to be like the sexual consultant, she was like, they didn't write anything here. So maybe this is the part they don't quite have a grasp on yet, that I can help with. And so, but she's very adamant about just how deeply they understood this thing. And I just thought that was kind of fascinating, just that, because of this stuff that she's explaining on the commentary that I had no idea were things. And somehow they knew about.
They knew. Yeah. So after those cuts were made to get the R rating, the movie came out, released in the US on October 4th, 1996. It would go on to gross $3.8 million in the US, an additional $3.2 million internationally. Not setting the world on fire, but again, this is only a $6 million movie, and this is at the height of the home video market. So it ended up doing fine once it hit on home video. It wasn't like a major hit, but it did, kind of prove that they knew what they were doing. So although the film had its detractors, they were kind of few and far between, and the film received overwhelmingly positive reviews, with many critics specifically highlighting the sure-handed direction of the Wachowskis. But Gary, I am willing to bet that if you were to dig into the deepest, darkest recesses of the internet, you might find some folks that aren't fans of this movie.
Yeah, I would say so. And even at the time, there was a lot of confusion about these two Wachowskis coming out here and making a film about lesbians, and there was confusion. But yeah, even over time, as the films become more understood and this, I don't know a better way to say it, but this lifestyle's become more understood, that whole thing, that there are still people out there that watch this movie and they need a nap. One of the reviews that is worth reading just on its own, just by the way, it comes from back then. They talk about, there's an excellent feature on the DVD from Olive that is called The Difference Between You and Me. And it's two feminist film critics that are talking about the movie. And
one's B. Ruby Rich, I believe, who is she specializes in queer cinema.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
But she coined the term new queer cinema and sort of defined it. So a pretty big expert on not only this film, but queer cinema as a whole.
That's cool.
Yeah. And also what I was going to say about it, I mean, in general, that feature is probably my favorite on the DVD, just because it's very educational, just talking about noir films in general, the education behind that, and then what neo-noir consists of, like how that came about and that sort of thing. But one of the things that's mentioned in there is a piece by a woman named Kelly Kessler, and they talked about even lesbian critics at the time just didn't know how to take this movie. Like, they couldn't wrap their brains around it. And she said the Kelly Kessler piece is worth reading on your own. But yeah, she immediately describes, like, you could tell, like, from the get, because she's just like, these two hetero married men from the Midwest, like, wrote a movie that, like, you can tell she's already just like thrown off. Like, she can't understand how these two normal white guys wrote a lesbian movie. And she's like trying to reconcile that in her brain. It feels like in the review. It's pretty interesting. But anyway, so all that aside, you think nowadays like more people would be on board with this movie and kind of realize what it is and be okay with it, but nay. Romstein here says it's Romstein is the name of the reviewer. Says the title of the review is porno flick disguising itself as a real flick. Yep, soft core lesbian porno reel made to make nerds like the Wachowskis drool for a bit to get some suspense. The acting is, to say the least, poor, and the plot is fairly stupid and simple-minded. I'm not impressed by the lesbian relationship between the cheesy and clearly spoiled brat of a woman, Tilly, and the hefty, swaggering woe man living next door. It sure looks like the Dust Till Dawn syndrome. What? After writing half a script, the writers go ape and write something completely different. Dust Till Dawn started out as a standard formula written Tarantino thing and ended up a stupid but entertaining horror splatter flick. This one started as a lowbrow, softcore porn thing and ended up a mafia thriller. It doesn't work. 1 out of 10. And I might add, I find Gershon's acting just above ridiculous.
Oh, fuck that. She's amazing. She's great. Also, I like the idea that this person thinks that Quentin Tarantino sat down to write From Dusk Till Dawn and gets enough. Like 40 pages into it. It's like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's throw some vampires in here. Like that wasn't the plan from the beginning.
I think so. Frank says, I began watching this movie with somewhat high hopes because of my friend's strong recommendation. However, I just could not finish this film. I felt it was trying to push the envelope, and that does not necessarily make for good filmmaking. First, you are introduced to the heroes of this movie who turned out to be a lesbian pair. Unusual and unexpected. Second comes the scenes of torture, where the tormentors creatively used normally innocuous household items. The visual cruelty was just too much, and we had to turn off the movie. This was unfortunate because we heard the storyline itself is actually quite good. If you're uncomfortable with scenes of violent torture and or lesbianism, this is not the movie for you.
Bunch of prudes.
Yeah. I want to set Frank down and show him Hostel.
That's right.
Like really violent torture.
Hey, Frank, have you seen The Human Centipede?
Sir, you gotta check this out. You're gonna love it. Storyline's great. It's a very Christian film.
Sexy.
Wait, do you like eating ass, Frank? Jason says, I just like this one just because of this line. Jason said, 1 out of 5. If I were Siskel or Ebert, I would give this movie the finger. And I feel like there are so many different ways to take that. And I don't know.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
I don't think he was being that clever.
I was just like, wow, Jason, this review, how deep is it really? Well, no, yeah, anyway.
Careful.
Hey, let's go to Misha's review. Not for me is the title. I absolutely adore Jennifer Tilly in the Chucky movies. She's the woman girls should idolize, not the Nicole Richies of the world. She has curves and is proud to flaunt them. What the fuck is this review?
Any review with a Nicole Richie reference is gold.
Right. This year of our Lord 2021. So why was I so disappointed in this film? For starters, I hate movies about the mafia or anything of the sort. So only really watched this film for Jennifer Tilly. Plus, it was a birthday present. It wasn't good, in my opinion. I didn't find the scenes between Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon in the slightest bit sexy, and I didn't get turned on. The two actresses certainly had chemistry. I just didn't find the scenes where they progressed to the bedroom very sexy. It just didn't do anything for me, which I was quite surprised at. So essentially, basically, Misha saying
he didn't get a boner, so
couldn't jerk to this one. I didn't watch much more of the film, as the start of the film seemed to be mostly Jennifer and Gina getting it on, and then it descended into mafia rubbish. I watched the first 40 minutes, gave up, and quite happily never watched it again. Actually, I think that Misha perhaps did get off to this movie, and that was like 40 minutes in, maybe at the sex scene, and it was just like,
they were
well,
done.
now I'm going to bed.
The end.
I got what I needed out of this movie.
This can end here. Con 1994 is the name of this reviewer. The review is from September 15th, 2021. So this is great. I did not like this film. Terrible representation of lesbos. And I should know. Someone pointed out the seductress's voice sounded like Stuart Little's mom. And we looked it up. It was. Then I just couldn't take her seriously for the rest of the film. Not that I ever could take her seriously. Long-winded and boring. Did too much of an opening of the goddamn suitcase. The cinematography is all right sometimes. Dialogue's incredibly cliche. I could guess what they were going to say a lot. This film is not for me, and I don't ever want to see it again.
Jennifer Tilly's and Stuart Little.
I didn't know that either, but apparently it's Stuart's mom.
Oh, the mouse mom, not because Gina Davis plays the mom, the adopted mom. You ever think about that movie? Oddly enough, I was talking to my wife about Stuart Little the other day because M. Night Shyamalan wrote it. That's a bit of trivia.
Oh, okay.
Right. But can you imagine if you're a child in a orphanage and every time someone comes, you're like, hopefully this is my new mom and dad. Maybe this is it. Maybe I'll finally have a family. And these motherfuckers come in and adopt a fucking mouse instead of me.
Yeah, but I mean,
he does drive a car.
He does drive a car.
There's that.
And the mouse probably has that scenario like 1,000 times a day. So, it's like, I'm not going to get picked. I'm not a human kid. So it makes sense. Heretic says the Matrix must be a miracle because everything else the Wachowskis have ever done is plastic and empty. The slick stylization of Boundlet is as generic as Jennifer auditioning for Morpheus, but without Lawrence Fishburne's charisma, Tilly's performance. Features the least threatening villains imaginable. I wish I cared about the twist, but it's hard to have fun when the direction is so rote, soulless, secondhand, and second-rate.
What movie did these people watch?
I don't know. I got two
In
more.
what world? Like these people are like, oh, there's no chemistry between these two leads. This is a visually boring movie. Like I watched a completely different movie than any of these people watched.
Yeah,
because I feel the exact opposite about every single thing that they're saying.
Including Luke here, who says, immensely disappointed to report that this just ain't too great. Very much a wannabe Coen Brothers flick, but with lesbians. The lesbian stuff is really cool. There's some sensuous stuff, and a lesbian sex counselor helped coach those scenes, so that's neat. The biggest issue here, though, for me is Jennifer Tilly. If this is how she usually acts, no wonder I just know her as the lady forever condemned to shitty movies. The breathless, high-pitched Marilyn Monroe and Quaalude shit she pulls here is infuriating. My wife, always up for gay shit, seriously, asked me to not watch this near her, lest she be forced to hear Tilly speak more. The story itself is pretty okay, if not somewhat convoluted around the halfway bit, but I do appreciate the ending. Cool for its place in LGBTQ films as a baby step before a colossal stride into The Matrix and Speedrunner.
Speedrunner.
It does say Speedrunner.
I don't even know the name of the movie.
Oh, it was the prequel to Speed Racer.
Yeah.
He was
he
was trying to win these automobile races without a car.
I couldn't fairly end this without a female review, and actually I have two short female reviews. Jenny says, "Are you fucking serious? The only good things about this was the sex scene. Gina Gershon, that's my queer speaking, and the decent cinematography. Everyone who gave this a high rating is too horny to be objective." And Tiff says, "I honestly didn't know what the fuck was happening because I wasn't paying attention throughout most of this. But I also thought that Corky's name was Quirky, and at first I couldn't unhear it for the rest of the movie. So that was pretty entertaining."
Sounds like your problem there, Tiff.
To be fair, I thought her name was Corgi, like the dog.
The dog?
Yeah.
Oh. Also weird. So
it wasn't until the credits rolled I was like, oh.
No, it's Corky, like Corky Romano, the classic character played by Chris Kattan.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So a couple reviews back, Gary, one of them compared this to the Coen Brothers, and that was actually something that when the movie came out, a lot of critics compared the Wachowskis to the Coen Brothers, specifically with similarities drawn between Bound and the Coen Brothers' debut film Blood Simple, which had come out, gosh, almost a decade before this, maybe over a decade before this, actually. And I mean, Bound has kind of a classic noir setup. You've got a love triangle and a pile of cash. That's classic film noir. It's the same setup as Blood Simple. But I think that the Wachowskis bring something pretty unique to it. And I think we've discussed this a little bit already, but I think that if you watch this movie now, in retrospect, familiar with the work that they would do after Bound, you can kind of see the film as a major key to where their filmography would go after this. So when The Matrix came out, there was a lot of talk about its visual similarities to graphic novels, comic books, and stuff. But that's a stylistic choice that began here. That didn't start with The Matrix. They didn't all of a sudden become super visual filmmakers on The Matrix. That starts here.
Yeah.
Even the way that the violence is played in this film, like you talked about before, Gary, when the mob boss falls down, like you can tell these are the guys who are going to make the Matrix, or the shot where the bullet hits the picture frame behind Joey Pants. And it's like super slow motion. Like that is a precursor to what they would eventually do with like bullet time in the Matrix. I mean, you can see all of the seeds of that stuff here.
There's some cool stuff with, when Caesar dies, like, that whole scene.
Visually with the white paint everywhere and the blood flowing through the paint. Like, yes.
In the interview with Maloney, he's like talking about just how fascinated he was in that scene. He said it took 5 hours to rig that scene. He said he knew that because he stood there the whole time. It was just like, what the fuck are these guys doing?
Yeah.
And he says he like watches that scene now and it's just like, that's fucking amazing. Like, but that scene just blew my mind.
And thematically, I think it tracks as well. Like, you've got Bound is about two women who are fighting against oppression. And the fight against oppression is something we're going to see pop up again and again in the Wachowskis films, especially in The Matrix, V for Vendetta, and Jupiter Ascending. That's a major theme of all of those movies. And another major theme of this film, and again, I think a major theme in pretty much their whole filmography, is kind of the idea of the feeling of being trapped or boxed in, or not to put too big of an exclamation mark on it, but bound by the hand that life has dealt you. And I mean, the film literally begins with an image of Corky tied up and trapped in a closet. And that, if that's not a visual metaphor, I don't know what is. At the time of the film's release, Lana Wachowski said in an interview, there's a long quote, but I'm going to read it here. She said, quote, "We think that not only gay people or queer people live in closets. Everybody does. We all tend to put ourselves into these boxes, these traps. And so what we tried to do is we tried to define as many of the characters through the sort of trap that they were making out of their lives. Getting out of the closet was meant to take on a bigger meaning than just the typical gay meaning." So what they're doing is they're viewing anyone who is trapped in a life that they don't feel they belong in, and using the metaphor of essentially the closet, coming out of the closet, being trapped in the closet, as a way to tell that story. And I mean, that's sort of brilliant because yes, it speaks to the LGBT community, but it also speaks to anyone else who's ever felt like they're not who they're supposed to be.
It's universal.
Absolutely.
Those themes are universal. Yeah.
And so when you look back at the film now, it's kind of hard not to read it as a sort of almost confession that these sisters, these siblings who came out as transgender women in 2012 and 2016 felt trapped by their identity. So when she went public with her transition in a profile written in the New Yorker, Lana tells the story of when she was a kid trying to walk in the girls' line while attending Catholic school as a child and being scolded by one of the nuns. So that's not something that they just, this speaks to something Gary said earlier. This is not something they just decided on later in life. This is a feeling that they had felt for their entire lives, that they were trapped, this feeling of being trapped in a body that's not yours, or being someone you're not supposed to be. And of course that includes when they were making Bound, and when while they're making Bound, they, to everyone around them, were identifying as straight men. And what they're doing, this is a story essentially about choosing your own destiny, creating your own story. That's what Violet and Corky are doing. They're deciding to get out of this oppressive state that they're in. Corky is under the thumb of Caesar, or excuse me, Violet is under the thumb of Caesar. Corky, she's literally been in prison for 5 years. They're wanting to reclaim their lives, reclaim their identity. reclaiming like their life that was stolen from the Caesars of the world. And I think we're going to see the themes of identity. When we were talking about this series, Todd, earlier this week or last week, a little bit, gearing up for this, one of the things we talked about that I mentioned that I think the theme of identity is something that's going to come up time and again with the Wachowskis. I mean, it's most often discussed, and with good reason, when people are talking about the Matrix.
Yeah.
But a lot of these films, if not all of these films, revolve around characters finding out or revealing that they're more than what they seem, that they're more than just the face that the world sees,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, don't get me wrong, clearly, obviously there are some folks that disagree, as we've just heard, but
some of them sounded like idiots too.
Right. But so many of the Wachowskis films are just enjoyable on a surface level.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's great. They're fantastic filmmakers, but just start peeling the layers. It just gets better and better.
Yeah. You can absolutely enjoy Bound on a surface level as a thriller.
Mm-hmm. That's the weird thing. Just to jump in there is that because it should be just a good mob movie. Just in general, and somehow lesbianism keeps popping up in there, which I get it. I mean, that's part of the purpose, but it's part of the purpose because it's like so outlandish. But anyway, I guess that also tells you that we're still in a weird spot in our society. But like every one of those reviews I read, it feels like at some point
every single one mentioned it.
Yeah, everybody mentions it, and it's like, oh, okay. But if it were like fucking Tom Cruise was one of the guys, like,
right,
would you still feel the same way? And I don't know that a lot of people would.
Yeah. Because they think that because they're watching a lesbian movie, that part of the goal of the filmmakers is titillation, and it's not. They're not making a porno. That's not what they're trying to make. That's not the point. That's not the point of the sex scenes. The point of the sex scenes is to show the connection between those two women, not to give you a boner.
One of the reviews, like literally he's talking about it's like too pornographic or it's a porno, or whatever. And it's like, really? That's what you got out of this? Because there's like one scene with titties.
Yeah, one. Like literally one.
And it's brief. There's not enough to like be a porno in this movie. It's really
be a very poorly made pornography film.
Right. And it's even I even got that way with the violence. It's like, okay, yeah, at the end there's some like shooting, but no more than you normally see. I was like, the guy complaining about torture. I'm like, well, yeah, they showed the one dude's finger get chopped off. I mean, they showed it fall on the floor.
This is 2 years after Pulp Fiction. Like, this is not new. I mean, and this movie got lumped in with stuff like Pulp Fiction a lot. I mean, it fits in with that era of independent filmmaking in the 90s.
And if you watch that movie, if you watch this movie and you see that, I mean, it's literally to set up that like this can happen, but they never go that far again.
Yeah,
like exactly. It never does that again.
Well, they actually wanted, I think it was Dino De Laurentiis wanted the finger falling on the floor taken out, but they were adamant about keeping it in because they're like, you have to see that these guys mean business.
Right. So it makes you scared when they're threatening it later.
Yeah.
But I mean, they don't do it again. I mean, it's just like blood spatter is the worst you get later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, that's sort of what's brilliant about this movie. You can watch it on so many levels. It is just as a thriller, it is incredibly entertaining. Like it really is.
Yeah.
And I love the structure of it because it starts off, you think that Corky is going to be your hero, essentially. And once shit goes sideways with Caesar, it sort of becomes Violet's movie. Mm-hmm. And Corky is barely seen for a good chunk of the latter half of this movie because Violet is just stuck trying to deal with Caesar and how he has handled the situation, which does not go according to their plan. So it's a really interesting structure as well, I think. But it's just like, I had not seen this movie. I bet I haven't seen this movie in 20 years. And I did not remember much of the plot. Like the twists and turns, I certainly didn't remember. And I was very engrossed by this. And not only that, but admiring just the visual filmmaking of the Wachowskis.
Well, and Jennifer Tilly does such a good job of selling the phone call to, was it Manny or
yeah, Manny? Is that his
it
name?
Manny?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
But she sells that phone call because you see her hang up and her face completely change.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay. And yeah, so yeah, it definitely shifts from, Corky to Violet for sure.
Watch her talk to any man. Like her voice is like this sweet little cute Jennifer Tilly voice.
Yeah.
When she's talking to men, especially like the cops too.
Mhm.
And like that sort of thing. She like latches the chain. Apparently that was her idea, to like put the chain on to creep open the door to so she's afraid. And like, oh, these two men are outside my door and that sort of thing. But when it's like Violet and Corky talking, it's not like that. Like she's very much just normal Jennifer Tilly. And you can hear her in the commentary track, just like talk like normal Jennifer Tilly or on interviews. Like she's not that person, the person that you normally see. I mean, even the people that are referencing Chucky, it's the same role she plays there now. Like she's learned, like that's her money maker.
Yeah, that's her thing.
Yeah.
It's like I could be sweet and cute and I have like a little innocent sweet voice, but I could be like a bastard at the same time.
Yeah.
And
I also don't understand any of those reviews that you read, Gary, that talk about, I feel like multiple ones said this, that like there's no chemistry between Gershon and Tilly, because
that's so stupid.
That is insane. Because that first scene, well, even in the elevator, like the way that Corky kind of does a double take when she sees Violet, the way that her, like literally, if you watch Gina Gershon's face, the way her facial expression changes is very subtle, but it's very like she's intrigued already. But that first scene where she gets called over, when Violet's at home by herself, where she's essentially trying to seduce Corky, that is like one of the like best seduction scenes that have ever been put into a movie. I mean, you can feel the heat coming off of the screen when you watch that.
Well, you're saying that like Gina Gershon is like, I feel like should be like world renowned as a respected actress and whatever. Like I love Gina Gershon, but this movie, I went in expecting Gina Gershon. Like I knew she would show up, but I don't think I knew what to expect from Jennifer Tilly necessarily, except cute Jennifer Tilly. But Jennifer Tilly carries a whole lot of this movie. And she is fucking fantastic.
She is outstanding. She really
in
is.
That elevator scene, there's like the triangle scene she sets up like between, Caesar's there and then Corky's over in the other corner. And there's that, but that shows up later. Like
they do that often.
Yeah.
The literal love triangle.
Yeah, they do it later with Mickey and Caesar and her like standing, like there's just like the weirdness, and she's like dominating these situations, and she's playing the game, like what I talked about earlier. Like she knows like what her role is, and so she just plays it until she finds a way out. And it's even another layer of it, if you want to peel back the onion this far, is that like when you're in the elevator scene, you see like Corky halfway through the movie, you like start to even wonder, like, is Violet on the up and up? Like, is she just using this as a way out and like seeing what she can get away with?
Yeah.
So it's even like a bigger deal when it pays off at the end that like, no, she's also serious about this.
Yeah.
These are two women that are like all for each other now. And
they ride off into the sunset.
Yes. So there's a lot in this movie. I don't get the people that hate it. Like, I mean, I think if you enjoyed it as a regular thriller, it works. And I guess I just want to blow up the Wachowskis as much as I can right now. So before we get to Speed Racer, but but I think this movie's fantastic. I think everything about it works brilliantly.
I agree. I mean, I was blown away by how sure-handed they were right out of the gate. Right out of the gate. It's impressive on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is.
Maloney, like, I think he said, clear, calm, and had command, and they were technically proficient, is how he described his time.
Yeah. And everyone talks about how they operate not as a single unit. Like, almost like they have a telepathic like bond. Like it's like they're always on the same page when they're directing together.
Yeah, he actually, maybe we watched the same thing, but Maloney was saying that like he would call them telekinetic, but it was kind of weird because it was like they would go in and they each had their own styles and angles that they wanted from something, but they just knew what the other one was thinking. And so like they had their own taste for how something would happen. But he said you could definitely see, like, even him, he said he walked into it knowing, he's like, right off the bat, he said you could see they were melding like Hong Kong cinema with graphic novels.
There's a lot of Hong Kong cinema in that. We haven't really talked about that, but that's a definite influence on some of the visual scenes, like the way that the camera, like somebody will be holding out a gun and the camera will kind of swoosh around them.
Yeah,
like that's
shots.
very John Woo. Like, you know, there's a ton of influence here, and we're going to see that throughout this series, obviously.
Well, even here too, the editor was talking about that they shot everything in one way was like real time and one way was in slow-mo, so they could swap in and out on everything.
Yeah.
Nice.
Really cool. So before we wrap up, do you guys have any further viewing? If you were going to do a double feature with Bound and something else, what would you throw in there?
Well, if I'm going first, I would say, listen, I kind of cheated. I just Googled to see what Google would say, like, because I knew this question was coming up. And Red Rock West is recommended a good bit. And I see that because I remember in that educational extra feature that I mentioned, Red Rock West is considered like one of the first neo-noir films.
Yeah.
So that
they came out like 2 or 3 years before this one, early 90s.
That makes sense. I will be honest with you and tell you the two movies I thought of when I watched this movie, besides obviously the fucking Matrix or something, is I think True Romance feels sort of like it. And this may sound crazy, but also Drive, especially, and the more you described like the identity or the like escaping like who you are, for some reason I even felt reinforced with Drive. Like I was like, this has its own style, but it's very much about this person like escaping their, like what they're confined to in this situation.
No, you're absolutely right. I would not have thought of that, but thematically you're absolutely right.
I'm gonna go. I mentioned, talking about enjoying things on kind of the surface level, which is kind of my role here on the show. Really enjoying once we get in here, peeling those layers back and seeing, the depth of, everything that we talk about. But in terms of pairing this with a heist movie that maybe doesn't go as according to plan, I like Bandits.
National Treasure.
Well, every movie is made better by Nick Cage, of course.
This movie would be great with Nick Cage.
Yeah,
sure would be.
Both roles.
I love Joey Pants, but if he was Caesar,
no, Corky and Violet.
Or if, let's be honest, if Corky and Violet were played by John Travolta and Nick Cage.
Oh yeah. Oh man.
Oh wow.
Let's remake Bound.
But still with Joey Pants. But still with Joey Pants.
Still with Joey Pants. 70-year-old
This is a
Joey
real
Pants.
gay movie. Oh my god!
But I love Bandits. Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis. Billy Bob Thornton. It's a heist movie.
I remember that being pretty fun.
I think this would be a fun pairing. Yeah.
Well, I lean towards a couple different ones. I think of this as part of this sort of interesting neo-noir trend that we had in the 90s, that something like Red Rock West was part of, or The Grifters, or even Basic Instinct. Like we talked, that's very much a neo-noir.
Basic Instinct's a good one, dude.
But I also, we mentioned it before because this got compared to it a lot, but Blood Simple, the Coen brothers' Blood Simple. I mean, it is a very similar plot. It's a little bit darker than this movie. It's not. This movie's a little more fun because this movie, one thing we haven't talked about is this movie does have fun, like especially with some of the musical choices, like throwing that Ray Charles song in there and things like that. Like they're having fun a little bit.
Wait a minute. What about the fact that we didn't even say this, but like the sex. The straight sex is depicted off screen.
Always off screen.
Yeah. Always off screen. It's only the lesbian sex depicted on screen. Yeah. And then the first time that Corky hears Violet and Caesar having sex, the very next scene is her like threading that drain in her tub with that pipe. And there's even a close-up on the side that says, "Do not force the snake."
Yeah, I mean,
they got campy. They were playing a little bit.
They really did. So that's where I think it differs a little bit from Blood Simple. I think Blood Simple is a great movie. It is not my favorite Coen Brothers movie by a long stretch. And I actually like this movie a little bit better than Blood Simple, but I think they'd make a great double feature. Or if you want to go in a different direction, another one that I thought of, and I like story-wise, it's a little bit different. It's very different. It's about two women who murder somebody, but it's another lesbian thriller. But Heavenly Creatures, which is directed by Peter Jackson, right before he did The Frighteners. It was his last. Well, I guess Frighteners was technically a New Zealand movie, but it was co-produced by Hollywood. But it's a movie that basically put Kate Winslet on the map, and it is a really great movie. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen Heavenly Creatures. But I think that could work as a double feature for this as well.
This movie's great because it's just like the neo-noir thing is like, obviously we're winding down here, so I'm not going to get all into that thing, but I would have to suggest, I talked to Justin and Todd about this before, if we like recommend a version of a DVD, or like if you should stream it, like we almost should have a segment on if it's worth buying a DVD. I will say that since Cinema Shock has started, I've been roughly most of the time buying the DVDs of these things and
Blu-rays. This is the 21st century.
I'm sorry, the Blu-rays. I apologize. I've been buying the tapes of these things, and
nice.
But this is the Olive Olive Films?
Yeah, Olive Films.
Signature.
Olive Signature. Yeah.
Version of Bound is pretty damn good. Like
it is really good.
Legitimately good special features and some educational stuff that I enjoyed, and them talking about the idea of where noir films came from out of World War II, and then the masculinity that was evolved, and like trying to revitalize masculinity, or like reimagine what that means. And I don't know, it's stuff I never thought about before. And then how neo-noir is like all about like reversing roles, which you can see very much the Wachowskis doing here.
And I like that it does, like that Blu-ray does have a lot of stuff that views the film from a more modern perspective, knowing where the Wachowskis' lives and filmography would go after this. I like that.
I
like
sure.
It's even got, and I don't know if you had a chance to read it, Gary, but one of the kind of cool features on that Blu-ray to me is that there's an essay on it written by Guinevere Turner. Guinevere Turner is a screenwriter who wrote her most well-known is American Psycho.
Oh, okay.
She's the screenwriter behind American Psycho, but she's also acted. She was on The L Word and things like that. So, but yeah, she wrote an essay about this film that is really worth a read. I think that is a really great Blu-ray, though.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the education I got from most of the special features, and it's interesting. I'm excited about where this series goes, because I listened to the commentary track, and I'll tell you something. The Wachowskis, this has nothing to do with anything else other than the fact that, like Justin said right up the top, they're nerds, and you can tell they're not like real open people about.
No, they have to be coached. That's why they had to have Susie Bright on that commentary to get them to talk.
Literally the commentary until you get to like the last third of the movie where Gina Gershon, Joey Pants, Jennifer Tilly, they're all there. Susie Bright, like. Until that, it's kind of a dead commentary. It's like they don't know what to talk about,
they're just not open about that kind of stuff. Like, Susie Bright will ask questions to get them to open up about scenes and things like that. It's like, oh, why did you do this shot? And they're very nonchalant about it, and very almost self-depreciating, where they'll just be like, well, I mean, it looks cool. And that's when knowing deep down they really think these things through. They just don't feel comfortable talking about them on commentary.
They do. And anything I'm saying, I'm not like actually disparaging the Wachowskis.
No. They're just not ones to talk about it.
Yeah, they just don't talk. And you can tell they've got their own inside jokes with each other and that sort of thing. But it's like when it comes to like trying to explain throughout a movie, they're like not really into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like I said, I watched a little bit of I watched The Matrix and started getting into some of the special features on that. And even there, like they're kind of tight-lipped about the stuff and just they're super not comfortable being in front of the camera at all.
It's not their thing.
Yeah.
So with the positive buzz around Bound, like we said, it didn't make a ton of money, but it was very clear that these were filmmakers to watch, and they had garnered enough goodwill to get their next film into production, one that would be considerably more ambitious than Bound. And that film, of course, you guys know the one we're talking about. So the one film that's synonymous with the Wachowskis' name, it would go on to be easily their most profitable film and one of the most influential films of all time. Talking about it on our next episode here on Cinema Shock, of course, it's The Matrix.
I'm excited.
And that's Matrix.
That's it, Todd. Look that up.
Right.
Google it.
I feel like that would be the way a porno would do it. So you could work your way in that way. I'm excited for this series mostly because I have not seen, confession time, I've not seen any of the Matrix sequels since the theater.
Wow.
Like legitimately, I've not watched either Matrix sequel.
I've
never
seen
watched the
many
Animatrix
times
or anything.
I've seen them many times over the years. My wife's never seen the sequels. She just watched The Matrix for the first time last year, which blew my mind.
What?
Yeah, it feels like it's like this.
She had
like,
never seen it.
It feels like it should have this like it's a token of your existence from 1999 or something.
Yeah.
Like it's
Kat has seen this so much she eye rolls at the suggestion of watching The Matrix.
I have a theory, Todd.
Movie.
I have a theory because my wife does the same thing. So your wife may be different, but I know my wife. And my wife will tell me, we just watched that to something we watched like 4 years ago or 4 years ago. Yeah. And I feel like what it is like something sticks in their mind that they remember, because what you got to do is you got to ask, elaborate on that. Tell me the story that happens.
Yeah.
They fucking can't. They can't ever do it. Like I can tell my wife right now.
They
tell me
being
the story
your
of the
wife.
Matrix.
Well, I'll save my
yeah,
I'll
but
save
she'll
my,
do that all the time.
I'll save the story of The Matrix and my wife Kat for the next episode.
Okay. Well, if you guys want to watch along with us, of course you can. The Matrix is easy to find. You can stream it pretty much anywhere. As of this,
it's easy
recording.
to find. It's ezy to find, but no one can be told what it is. Justin,
good one, Todd.
It's
better. That's better than Johnny Has the Keys.
Just all you got to do is search for the red pill online.
Do not do that. Don't
search. Say, just type in "red pill me" on Google
Reddit,
or something.
Reddit.com/r/red pilling.
Yeah.
That's
do
it.
that.
No,
and
don't please.
You'll know everything
for the love of
you've
God.
ever needed to know, and
For the
hopefully
love
you're
of
not
God, don't do that.
vaccinated.
As of this recording, they're all on HBO Max right now, so they are very easy to find. But head to cinemashock.net. You can always find links to everywhere that you can stream or rent these movies that we're talking about. We'll often even put, when I post the episode, I'll usually have links to where you can buy the Blu-rays and things like that at the bottom of the post. So look for that, cinemashock.net. You can also find our merch there. You can find our Discord server there. You can find all of our old episodes and series and pretty much everything you need to know about this podcast or the movies that we're talking about. So you can also follow us at cinema_shock. That's on Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. Like us on Facebook. And where can you guys be found for our lovely listeners to follow you?
My wife is like, is this the movie where Keanu Reeves says, whoa?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one. That's the only one.
The only one.
This is that one. I am at This is Gary Horn on all the social medias. Everywhere you can find me. At TIPW Show is my wrestling show. If you happen to like wrestling and you're listening to this, I don't know why you would be, but it could happen.
There is crossover between wrestling and movie fans, Gary.
Most certainly.
Yourself you are
I'm
an
a prime
example
of this. And most wrestlers would love to talk to you. I can confirm. Most wrestlers would love to talk to you about movies. About wrestling.
They're entertainers.
And I have a Star Trek podcast. If anybody's out there is interested in Star Trek,
Now that's a little less likely.
Nobody's gonna do that. Nobody's gonna do that.
But it's called the Computer Resume podcast, where we cover the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. And you can find that anywhere you find podcasts. And you can hit us up on social media at Computer Resume. And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials.
He's still not talking about the good shit yet, but it's coming.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
And
it's a long road getting from there to here.
Oh my God. I love it. That's the theme.
God.
Rise.
And I am at Justin_Bishop. Again, follow the show at cinema_shop. And you know, rate and review us on iTunes and all that stuff. Share us with your friends. If you got friends who are excited about the Matrix 4 coming out at the end of the year, that trailer just dropped this week, and it's fucking awesome.
I have a theory, and I'm going to record a mini episode and send it.
Do it. And so yeah,
I'm just glad Keanu's got his normal look though. His John
me too.
Wick look.
I didn't want that hairless Keanu from Bill and Ted 3.
Nobody wants
in
that
this movie. No. But yeah, if you've got friends that are excited about the Matrix 4, you know, send them this series. I think they'll dig it. I mean, we're talking about obviously the whole Matrix trilogy, but all of the Wachowskis films and their journey from the Matrix trilogy to where they're going to be on the Matrix 4. So send it along. Until next week, I guess.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
I'm a dead man, Johnny. I'm a fucking dead man. Guess again, Johnny. Who's the dead man? Who? Who's dead, fuckface? Who? I can't hear you, Johnny. Guess again. Take another guess, Johnny. Take another fucking guess. Johnny has the keys.
I knew you were going to use the fact that there was a character named Johnny in this to your advantage, but I wasn't expecting such a spot on Joey Pants impression.
I actually was really into that.
Listen,
I'm going to be honest with you.
Actor.
Todd, I take a bow, Todd.
Thank you.
Mr. Todd A. Davis,
Thanks,
writer, comedian, actor, thespian.
Appreciate it.
It was pretty fucking good. I'm not going to lie. And especially seeing him do it live. It felt good.
I was scared.
Nothing
It
works
felt
better
like
on a
we've
podcast.
only been building to this moment. Now we should kill it.
I know.
Nothing works better on a podcast like a visual gag, guys. Nothing
Wow,
works
he's
better
wearing a
like
Viking
visual
hat
gag.
right now.
No, yeah, he's well, it's Todd. He's fucking it up.